Welcome to Emerging Franchise Brands, the podcast that introduces you to the visionary founders of America's fastest growing franchise opportunities. We'll also hear from industry pros as they share insights on what it really takes to achieve the elusive milestone of 100 plus locations. I am your host, Frank Fumey, founder of I9 Sports, and my 20-year journey from inception to acquisition has given me a unique perspective on how to succeed in franchising. Join me as we welcome today's guest. Hello, everyone, and welcome to the Emerging Franchise Brands podcast. On today's show, I have a dear friend, Joe Lindenmayer, who's the CEO and owner of the Gulf Coast, California Closets. He also was a past chairman of the VetFran Committee and also a board member on the IFA. Joe, welcome to the show.
Frank, great to see you, brother.
Great to
Good
see
to be
you.
here.
Thanks, man. It's been too long.
Yeah, exactly. That just means we've been doing it a long time.
That's true. That is true. Joe, you and I go far back to, the days when you were co-owner and VP at TSS Photography. I'm starting up this little sports franchise organization, and you guys did the sports photography for the company. And I wanted to bring you on because you just have such a vast experience, of course, with being on the IFA and VetFran. And you're one of the few people too, Joe, that has gone from being a franchisor to a franchisee. And you've made that leap. So I'm curious to cover all these things as well as your take on what it takes to succeed in franchising. Does that sound good?
Sounds like fun.
Okay. So first of all, Joe, how did franchising find you?
Well, so Frank, it's kind of funny. In 1993, I was a returnee from Desert Storm and had decided to move into to greener pastures down south in Atlanta. And by all things, it's actually part of the connection you and I have through softball in New York back in the day. But I got on a church softball team, and it happened to be sponsored by three guys that were in franchising, gentlemen who had founded the company that eventually I bought and ran for many years. And the director of marketing and the director of franchise development were the shortstop and second base on the team. And I got out of the team and we did pretty well, won the division. And about halfway through the season, they just said, hey, you seem like kind of a positive guy. We're looking for a development manager and somebody to go out there and open up all these new franchises we're selling. What do you think? And I said, talk to me about it. So long story, there's a lot of other twists and turns to that, but that was in October of 93. And that's when I started my career in franchising. We were known as the sports section back then, but we did youth and sports photography. We had, about 100 or so franchises that were, sold. We had about 60 of them open, and we were just trying to get our hands around this emerging brand of, training and onboarding and doing it the right way. And that was the start of a pretty neat journey and career in franchising.
Nice. Well, franchising, we always say, finds us, and nobody very rarely comes from a franchising background. So through softball.
Yeah. Yeah.
So you helped grow TSS Photography all the way through 2015. What happens after that?
Well, so in 2014, even back up a little bit. So I left as a franchisor briefly in the mid 90s to be a franchisee for TSS in Tampa, not too far from where you are now. Mm-hmm. And we had sold a multi-unit business. They wanted somebody to run it. There were some things that I was looking at directionally that I was fascinated to do. I wanted to get more hands-on and get more operator experience. And we had some things going on at corporate where it was just a good time for me to maybe make the move. So I moved to Tampa and ran the business there, sold that. And just then the director of franchise development went over to the Athlete's Foot, another franchise company, a good buddy of mine, Russ Smith. And they asked me to come back to TSS to run franchising and take over the entire franchise division where we were going with that. And so did that for years, bought out one of the original founders, a guy that I played softball with, and along with another of the founders, a partner of mine. We ran until 2014, and then we eventually sold it. And that's what kind of started my next career with California Closets in 2015.
So you go to California Closets as vice president of franchising, and yep. If I recall, overall, you had to oversee the corporate growth, right?
Yeah. It was pretty wild times for California Closets. They're organizationally such a rapid growing company at the time. There were a couple brands under the First Service umbrella of brands that were just rocking and rolling. And of course, Serpro Painters have been successful and done well for so many years. And the Paul Davis business was also looking to expand through really acquiring some of their franchises in their major markets. And so California Closets was underway doing that. And they wanted someone who could really build that infrastructure, help in that transition with corporate owned and franchised and what that looked like going forward. And so, I've been friends with Charlie Chase since the, mid 90s. And we had a conversation one day, and this was after I was doing some consulting with the company that bought our company. And he asked me to just take a look at what they're doing. And I fell in love with the brand. I love California Closets. I love people that were there and just the mission of where it was going and how it was going to continue to evolve as a franchise company.
Mm-hmm. It's a great company. We all know it. They own the category. I'm sure some of those were the reasons why you wanted to join them, right?
Yeah, well, exactly. And I think at the time, and this is something that and I know you've heard too, Frank, when a franchise company evolves to the point that they consider buying back some of their franchises or maybe making corporate owned, they either sometimes start doing that maybe a little too early and have issues with the fact that they're kind of trying to be a jack of all trades and master of none. There's a lot of belief that you're either a franchise company or you're a corporate owned franchise company, but you're threading a needle to try and do both. And that's kind of where California Closets was at the time. There was some deep mistrust of what was happening and buying back some of these markets. There wasn't a clear conduit of communication to the veteran franchisees that, hey, we're not going to terminate your franchises and take you over. And so they've maintained a franchise ownership model and they have the corporate model. And I think we've done a really good job of it. And that's what's interesting, that my transition from running that part of the division to now being a franchise owner myself under that also espouses, I think, how far the relationship and the trust has come, that the old saying, hey, if I believe in it that much, why wouldn't I do it? Well, I did it.
Sure. So, yeah. You ate your own cooking, didn't you? I want to explore this a little further about how the company went through this phase of buying back franchise locations. We have emerging founders that are listening to the show, probably thinking right now, well, I just want to grow my business and I'm going to grow through selling franchises. Maybe they're thinking having a dual strategy. I know I did the dual strategy, but later in the game, we had like 100 franchise. Well, we were more than 100. We were probably about 125 franchises strong before I entered opening up company-owned locations, dealt with a whole lot of backlash because the franchisees saw it as a threat. Boy, I wish I knew you back then. You could have given me a little bit of a warning of what I was going to get into.
Yeah,
I would love to hear how you guys navigated that.
Well, buddy, I think that's where you always led with integrity. And I think, that was something that when you do that, you wonder, what more you have to show because you've operated that way, right? And then you get people that don't know you that well or people that are newer to the system and they start questioning things. And I think that's what happened with California Closets. We have some of our almost original franchises together since the early 80s. So there's a lot of history, a lot of culture that was there. And I think part of it was them getting to know me. They knew Charlie. They knew, Bill Barton, who was the CEO at the time. They knew some of the other people that were really ingrained into the system. And of course, they knew the franchise persona and culture of First Service Brands. What it really came down to is they just didn't know what was going to be the priority, right? And how that was going to kind of take hold. And I think, if I'm listening as an emerging franchisor, it's a strategy that you need to talk to a lot of people that have been there. And I know I'd always be willing to, I know you'd be willing to help somebody, because one of the benefits of franchising is you're growing with other people's capital, right? That's the benefit to the franchisee, is that they're getting equity in the business and they're putting their money into it as a franchisor. You can go sometimes faster and hopefully faster by utilizing, a franchise distribution model to buy back units. I know, in our case, you're going to know a lot about the operations. You're going to know whether they're successful. You need to know the people. You need to know who the key operators are within the business, because, some businesses you're buying, an existing family and you really got to understand the culture of that family and how, if it turns into corporate owned, what's going to happen to that. And then if you start changing some of the key players in our business, there's a general manager. I know, that's kind of the model that you guys were looking at, maybe even a regional, somebody that was operating regionally. There's just a lot of moving parts to that and a lot of lessons that were learned. I know in our case, when you start talking about values and multiples, right, and what you're going to need to have for deep pockets to be able to push through maybe the glass ceiling that the existing owner kind of hit, or some geographic boundaries that they maybe struggled with. In our business, we open up showrooms, so you got to have a couple $100,000 to open up another showroom, and a lot of times that might have been a limiting factor for reach or just the desire to want to manage 3, 4, 5 hours away, a team for that. So those were all things that I know we navigated through. And again, and the 15 years almost of this being something, it was a graduation in some cases, because we actually first called them franchises, which I'm not really sure that that's a trademarkable name. It doesn't sound great rolling off the tongue, but those were kind of a starter set to ultimately where we went with the full-on corporate owned. Those were some people that worked at our corporate office or may have been, at one point willing to invest some money into the businesses. So that was even a hybrid of where we are now. And I know we changed through that at the time. So it's been a fun journey. It really has. California Closets is almost 50-50 right now as total revenues between what's franchised and what's corporate owned.
Interesting. And what about number of units total for California Closets?
Well, so that's where it's a little bit funky because we operate maybe a little bit differently. Our geographic area is a little bit bigger, but we look at showrooms and how many showrooms we have. And I think right now we're somewhere about 150 showrooms, and those service, a larger geographic area. And the AUVs are much bigger than I think other businesses because of that. Mm-hmm. But the number of units I think we have is like 64, 65.
And of this whole split, how many are corporately owned versus franchised?
It's roughly half and half.
Yeah.
It's roughly, the revenue. Some of the corporate owned are in bigger markets, and and I know there's all sorts of data that's out there either through the FDD or in some other interviews. But I think as we look at that, having some major market authority and really taking advantage of this amazing brand that we have under California Closets to optimize that market reach. Mm-hmm. In some markets where we were severely underserved before, I think now we're doing the brand justice.
Nice. So I'm kind of looking at your resume here. So you're working, as the vice president of franchising until July 2019 before you become a franchise owner. Did you know COVID was going to happen in 2020 and that the home service business was going to explode? That you're like, you know what? I think I want to own a whole bunch of these before 2020.
But that's where I just laugh and shake my head. That we used to joke in the Marine Corps, there's no atheists in foxholes. Well, in franchising, you do a lot of paying as well. But not knowing that COVID was happening was part of it. Not knowing that we were going to get hit by 2 hurricanes in the first 18 months.
Oh,
one, basically doing a direct hit on our facility in the area of our facility and blowing some of our neighboring buildings away. And we just got spared with garage doors and roll-up doors and glass doors being blown out and some of the ceiling being blown off. But you know what it is, man? There's adversity everywhere. And, the freak out factor hit me when COVID came down. And, we have this new fleet of vehicles, and I bought up, some new vans to upgrade our team at the time. And then we were told we couldn't go anywhere in clients' homes, right. And we weren't going to do basically our entire business. We don't have a to-go or a DoorDash or a delivery business for custom home storage. We have to get in the homes to do it.
Sure.
So yeah, it freaked us out a little bit. And then we just worked through it. And I think, I'll give a plug again to IFA. And I think the strength of a brand that we came together, shared best practices, pivoted unbelievably on the sales side on what we were doing. And we had a whole virtual environment set up and certifications so that people had confidence in knowing how to navigate through that. And then it just came down to being smart, managing money and making sure your people are safe, right? And that was huge because they didn't know what was happening either. So
sure.
Yeah.
But you did have explosive growth, I would imagine, once you guys were able to get back into the homes.
We did, and I'll just speak about my business. But yeah, we tripled in about 4 years. We tripled the size of our business, which, again, I think speaks partly to the opportunity that was there when I acquired the business, but also to our amazing team and the support that we got to execute on that and take it to that level. But, it's like anything, Frank, and you saw it multiple times. You either see the challenges or the opportunities, and the word chaos, right? We all know what that means, both of those things. So yeah, it was a trip. I have a very understanding wife and a, at times, semi-full liquor cabinet that helped me navigate some of those decisions.
So I want to go back to 2019. You go home one day and you tell your wife, I think I want to be a franchise owner. What does she say?
Well, it actually is even a little bit before that. So, I think that the definition of an entrepreneur in some cases is someone who's too much of a pain in the ass to work for somebody else again. And I think I probably evolved to that point to some degree. And I had been trying in my role as VP of franchising, I had been trying to find a buyer for the owner in the market, and he had some health issues and was a good friend of mine, and I know what they were up to, and it was urgent that they get out of the business. And I had made a couple visits and tried to find a buyer, and the last one we turned down after having the conversation with the owner. I'm like, look, this candidate won't get approved. And he just spoke of some of the desperation. And to be candid, I had been thinking about it for a while.
Mm-hmm.
I had the itch to own my own gig again. And I was sitting in the Sky Club of the New Orleans airport, and I'd gotten to know the bartender pretty well. And we were just chatting, and I'll give him credit because he's a good friend to this day. And I looked at him, and I was kind of telling the story. And he goes, Joe, why aren't you buying it? You talked about looking at doing something, and you love this business. I see your eyes light up when you talk about the business and the brand and the people you get to do it with. And that's honestly where I got home, and I thought about it the whole flight back to Atlanta at the time. And that's where I just said, and my wife was like, yeah, that's great. Get the details. Let's go for it. So she knows after all these years, I've done so many different things, and fortunately, knock on wood, they've worked out pretty well. So she had a lot of faith in that.
That's great. Well, yeah, we know it definitely takes having a strong spouse and spousal support to make the machine work, right?
Yeah. Well, you've got to have your community, and that's a big part of franchising, right? Is you got to set a culture and have people that align with that and values that. When times get tough, that adversity doesn't build character, it reveals it. And you've got to have it to be able to lean on when times get thin like that.
Yeah. So that's the great time to kind of segue to your involvement in the IFA. As long as I've known you, you've always been someone so involved in the franchise community. And I thought that's why it'd be great also to bring you on is talk about your involvement in franchising, not just with California Closet or TSS Photography, but your involvement because you see things at a much more macro level in franchising, and you've been around and being involved in so many different brands and seeing the great work that the IFA does. And look, I'm not afraid to make this an IFA commercial because I have a debt of gratitude to the IFA, and to get all of the knowledge from everybody that was so generous. I grew my business because of the other people. It wasn't because of what I knew. I didn't know anything about franchising. So you've been on the board of directors now from 2020 till end of 2023. So I'd love to hear more about what your role has been and the impact that you've had an opportunity to make.
Yeah, well, you touched on a little bit earlier, Frank. I didn't know anything about franchising really, except McDonald's and Holiday Inn as a kid. And when I took on this role, I am fastidious about wanting to learn and accelerate the learning curve to things. And I think for sure that's what the IFA does and did for me. I got connected up with some neat people. My first conference, my first IFA conference in 1994 that I went to, one of the first people I met was Rhonda Sanderson, who I know was actually instrumental in you and I getting together at that dinner umpteen years ago.
Yes.
And, Scott Lair and Paul Rocchio and so many of the people that were there at the time that really took us under their wing and pointed us to the right area. And Lane Fisher from a legal side of it immediately, he and Rich Greenstein were great attorney resources for us when we had to navigate some of those things over time. And for me, obviously, I was in the Marine Corps and serving and giving back is important. So the IFA, for all those years that it gave to me, I felt, a debt to give something back and to be part of that loop of refreshing things and helping serve and take them to where they'd like to go and not just help me get to where I wanted to go, right? Getting on the VetFran Committee back in 1994 was really the first step to seeing the inner workings of it. I remember early on, I actually applied to the board back in the mid 90s. And I think I got the nicest rejection letter, but they're like, hey, how about you come to 5 meetings before you try and run for the board? And I didn't really know. I just wanted to help. I just wanted to serve. And so that's where I got pointed into some of these channels. And I've been on the Franchisee Committee. I've been on VetFran. I've been on the conference committees and other special programs and had the opportunity to meet with and testify and work with Congress on things that are important to small business owners and work with veterans in transitioning from, a uniform into a corporate brand, from serving the country to serving constituents in the retail space. So it's been a lot of fun. I think for sure I could serve for 20 years more and not give back everything that I've received from it. So I'm very humble and appreciative to that. But I think, that's one of the things that, anybody looking to get into franchising or looking to really shake the tree and do something different. There's so many people in the franchise community in the IFA that have done it already. There's opportunities in other countries that I've been able to open up master franchises in New Zealand and Australia, and we had South Africa and Canada and Mexico, and we've not gone to countries because of what we've learned through the IFA, and not gone into certain businesses that we've learned through that. So yeah, we've been through brand changes that again, I lean on people that I met through different companies, and Matt Alden's been a buddy of mine from the first days in franchising, and it's been a lot of fun. And again, I think there's just so much information there that's constantly changing, and even up to today, to the battles we're having with some of the states and the ways that they want to wholesale change the franchise model, and whether it's joint employer, whether it's other tax and revenue reporting issues or other things that we have. I know the IFA is standing on guard 24/7 on behalf of this whole distribution model in this industry of franchising that needs someone to advocate for them, because they're seeing things when they're at a committee level 2 steps out of ever getting to the state legislature. They're catching wind of things that are coming up that they're trying to put fires out before we even see the first spark. So it's very important that we have them out there for us.
Sure. And the other thing about just being part of the IFA, kind of what you said earlier, is that you don't have to do this alone. Somebody has already done what you're trying to do. There's no reason to say, well, I can't do this because I don't know. Yeah. If you talk to enough people that are involved in the IFA, somebody is there to help you. There is somebody who has done it.
Absolutely, man. And I know you've never met a stranger either. You're easy guy to talk to, and you've always been willing to listen and open up conversations. And I think that's just the secret. You've got to be willing to just ask the question that you're needing help with. And I know I've bounced things off you over the years, Frank, and you've had a great group of team members that work for you at I-9, and one of my old guys worked at I-9 and partnered with some of your guys over the years. And I think that's the cool thing, is that there's people out there that just want to help, and they want to have those conversations, know what you're up against, and if they don't know, they probably know somebody that does. So that's the unique networking part of it. So cool. So
a little bit more about this whole trends in franchising and the threats that we have. I had Paul Rocchio on the podcast not too many weeks back. And of course, we talked about the whole joint employer situation. What's your take on it? Where do you think this thing ends up?
Buddy, I'm so frustrated by it, because I saw it, a decade or more ago, and it's just like this smoldering heap of leaves that just can't wait to get ignited at certain points. And it's frustrating, because the model opens up so many opportunities for people that wouldn't have it otherwise. And anybody that talks to someone who had the opportunity to become a franchise owner or look at that realizes how unique and how special this is. And I've never, as a franchisor, I've never interviewed my staff's people and made the hiring decision for one of our franchisees. I've never looked at a franchise relationship and said, you know what, you need to fire this person. I've never had that direct control. Now, because we do one of 3 things, have the brand, have the operating agreement, right? Those things, they force us into this channel that says you have to have these things, and now you're a franchise, and now they want to, classify it as joint employer because of that. And I just think that's the hypocrisy that needs to be stomped on and eliminated once and for all. But as long as there's people that make money off of the arguing about it, and we all know, and I love attorneys. I have a lot of good attorney friends, but between lawmakers and attorneys, there's a lot of job security out there. I used to work as a horticulture teacher in prison, and somebody would say something about something that happened in a crime, and I said, well, it's job security for a lot of people, right? There's a lot of people that like that, and I think that's almost the buffoonery that we're in now. That whatever the case is, we can talk about the merits. We can go to Congress and have the conversation, and reasonable people realize that, this is the best thing. This is such an American icon and a model of how to do business, yet we're throwing up barriers that just cost more money. They drive more inflation, because we've got to pay our attorneys with revenue we get from charging clients. So it's got to come from some, right?
Yeah, true. I was talking to a non-franchise attorney friend who was telling me about a case that has nothing to do with franchising, but it kind of, to your point, he had heard somebody say, we can't settle on this because then we'll have to stop collecting fees. Obviously the most unethical way of practicing law, but that's kind of to your point where this whole joint employer conversation is not new. I remember it came up earlier when I was in franchising in the beginning years. And then around 2009, 2010, remember it became a thing again. Then it kind of disappeared for a while. And now it's made its, resurgence though in a new, much more vocal way. Do you think this is going to somehow, the dust will settle?
Brother, I wish I knew. Like when you look at what had just happened with California and the settling, to use your term, on the casual fast food hour wage wage rate. Yeah. I mean, there's so many things, and there's 2 or 3 things within that I think are also a slippery slope for us as an industry that we've shown that will settle on an issue that most people don't want to settle, and it's an arbitrary number. I mean, setting a number that someone in a suit in an office thinks is the right number, rather than the market settling that. I know I have a problem with that. And I think there's, like anything unchecked can roll into something that's going to hurt somebody or be a problem. I just don't see that. And going forward, I don't see it ending. I really don't. I think with the push for the unionization of things under, certain leadership constituencies, that's a way that they see this coming to fruition. And I'm concerned about it. I think as a franchisor, I always push back because, and I know you were like this too, Frank, you want to bend over backwards for your franchisees, especially, in the earlier phases, right? You're going to do everything you can.
Anything.
And when you've got to pull back because you're worried about that joint employer, fuzzy line, but that if I give this advice or if I do this for them, they're going to be successful and it's going to maybe make or break their business, but you don't do it because you're worried about that artificial line in the sand. That's the risk that I think we're putting the businesses in by even thinking of negotiating and settling on that.
I was going to say, maybe this is the one that has to go to Supreme Court and be put to bed for once and for all. And this is not the one, this is the one to die on the sword for, right?
I really think it is.
Yeah.
Yep.
Yeah. I agree. I do agree with you. Let's talk about VetFran. So first of all, thank you for your service. I know you were a tank commander during the first Gulf War. Then you got involved with VetFran kind of early on.
I did. And just one minor correction. I was a tank driver and loader in Desert Storm. When I got out of the Marine Corps, I was a tank commander. But back in the 90s, I was actually in Fort Knox. I was in tank school. And, I don't mind having a frosty beer every once in a while, Frank, as I know you and some of our listeners do from time to time. Uh-huh. But I was in the E Club when Saddam Hussein invaded Iraq. And that put an end to our last 5 days of tank school. And guys got their orders and got shipped out. And I was in college at the time and withdrew from that semester and went over early to be part of an advanced force of 9 guys that took our tanks off of ships and got ready for the rest of the battalion to come over. But VetFran was something that I know Don Dwyer at the Dwyer Group had a vision for coming out of Desert Storm, and Mary Kennedy Thompson, who is one of my idols and mentors in franchising, and I'm lucky enough to call her a great friend. I had the opportunity to be her vice chair of VetFran and then take over those shoes. But I got a phone call in 1993 from a Vietnam vet in Massachusetts who had heard about VetFran, loved sports and franchising, and heard about this opportunity with TSS at the time. And I didn't know anything about it. And I was embarrassed because here I am, I'm still in the reserves at the time.
Right.
So again, I dug in as I do and found out about it. And that was the first VetFran franchise that I sold and was a part of. And I will say for 20 years after he got out of the business, he and I were great friends and sold dozens of businesses over time and helped people get into franchising. We're veterans. And it's just such a cool program that the IFA, again, embraced. Mary had a call to arms and a call to dollars to get some momentum behind it and get a dedicated person on staff to help drive the program. And it's brought in over 100,000 people as owners of franchises or opportunities in franchising and careers. We've had Operation Enduring Opportunity, a great campaign in 2014 through 2015 that saw, almost 150,000 people come into franchising in career paths and starter jobs and opportunities to transition from the military into franchising as a career path. And man, that's good stuff. The fact that it made such an indelible impact on it. Last week, I had the opportunity to talk to Franchise Forum in Atlanta, VetFran, and about the path that, not just franchisors, but that franchisees can take, that supplier groups can take, and how simply changing your ad and how you're recruiting people can speak to veterans and open up opportunities for veterans so that they identify that, hey, this is a company that understands maybe some of the challenges that veterans face, maybe their reserve call or National Guard service, which we actually have one of our team members who's out for 3 weeks right now doing one of his advanced trainings. And yeah, it's a little bit of a disruption to the business if you look at it that way, but it's also a great opportunity for someone to serve their country, to have someone with I think the highest levels of integrity and service commitment to a brand that you could ever have, willing to take a bullet for their last are they willing to talk to a difficult customer for this one? I think so.
I think they could. Yes. I was just thinking we probably shouldn't make any assumption that an emerging founder is hearing this and knows what VetFran is. So maybe we should step back and say what VetFran is, and if they think that really focusing on trying to recruit veterans is an ideal fit for their franchise model, what are some of the things they should do? Yeah,
so good call out on that, Frank. Thank you. Yeah, VetFran.org is a great starting point that talks about some of the basics to what VetFran is, but it's a program of the IFA that helps transitioning military men and women and spouses understand opportunities in franchising, be it franchise ownership or, again, as employees of brands. It provides discounts to franchise fees through most brands. There's a 5-star criteria that someone who really doesn't understand much about the brand can look at those star ratings and get an understanding of maybe longevity of the brand or some of the outreach that they do for veterans, or as you go from a 1 to a 5, generally it's a little bit more proven model for franchise ownership opportunities or development opportunities for veterans, or just a newer brand could be a 1-star and they're just getting going, but it's a way that they give back to the community. There's opportunities for education, for mentorship. That's one of the things that we love to do from the VetFran Committee is mentor up and coming veterans into looking at opportunities for franchising. And it's not our job to promote any one brand at all. And we all take that agnostic challenge to make sure that we're not promoting it, but we're helping them identify strengths and weaknesses they've gotten through the military service, ability to follow a proven model, right? And being in the military, you've got a brand, you've got certain SOPs and certain guidelines they want you to adhere to. And as we know, franchising has that as well. It's not a free-for-all. It's not Joe's Closets or Frank's Sports League organization. We have a brand and a model, and there's certain things you've got to stick to. And veterans have proven that they can do that. They've proven that they've got skills and ability to follow and execute. And that's, again, what you want in franchising. And I say this all the time. It's not a given. It's not a guarantee. I'd like to think that every veteran will lead with integrity and do the right things. But unfortunately, you can't just take that just because they've served in the military. You still have to vet them and go through your normal recruitment and interview and evaluation processes. But again, I think there's an esprit de corps and a culture there that if you can foster that either in an emerging franchisor or in a supplier group or an existing veteran community, there's no better team member you can have than someone who believes in the brand, has served the country, and will fight for you, and your brand and their clients and customers and teammates as a veteran.
Totally. About how many franchisors are members of VetFran?
Man, it's close to 1,200 now, I think, is the latest number. It's always interesting this time of year is the renewal time for brands that want to review their star rating system. They're getting ready to file their FDDs and updating a lot of the material in that. So whether it's, a free membership, which VetFran is not a money maker for the IFA. It's a program of outreach. It's a program to try and help veterans get into franchising, understand all the benefits and the opportunities that exist there. But there are opportunities for sponsorship of VetFran and people to help support the mission and get behind it and do things for it. They've got to fill out the paperwork. They've got to give some reporting of information back so that IFA has an idea of, hey, what is the success rate? I know there was a study, I think it's 2 years ago now, but the net return of a veteran-owned franchise was almost 2 times the average of a non-veteran owned. So, there's things that by that data in Franchise Business Review, and Eric Stites, who's another good friend of ours, Bill Rowan, the work they do to encapsulate some of the data is important, because if we don't know what's going on there, we can't address it, we can't promote it, we can't identify it. And I think that's where the 1,200 to 1,500 franchisors, you might have 200 or 300 that are star rated, that have gone through a little more diligence and their review and their annual submittal of information. So we're trying to increase that. Eric Gagnon with We Sell Restaurants is on the VetFran committee, and he and I were talking about this last week. Is there's just a lot of great stories out there. There's a lot of information, and stories to be told, and we want them to be able to tell it. We want to give that conduit. I know the IFA does a great job with that.
Yeah. Now, if I was a franchisor and I'm a member of VetFran, what would you say are some of the best practices that I could use to help me recruit vets to become part of my system?
Well, I think the first thing is become a full-fledged member of VetFran, get involved, come to a committee meeting, understand what the topics are that we're talking about. The website, vetfran.org, gives a lot of information. There's kind of a playbook there for franchisors on what to do. It's everything from talking about veterans in your system and knowing who in your system might be veterans now. Strangely enough, Frank, a lot of franchisors don't even know that. Mm-hmm. There's people that served and they might have served a couple of years and it's really not front and center of who they are or what they identify with, but they served. Sure. And it's part of what made them. And so knowing that, maybe doing an internal survey, if they've not done that, to just ask their franchisees, hey, who's got veteran service or their spouse is a veteran. VetFran advocates on a lot of things, and it helps even in our businesses. There might be a certain certification or licensing that you do to own or operate your franchise. Do you know if you transfer in states with the military, your husband or wife gets transferred, that certification might not be valid in that state. So you could have been doing this for 20 years, been the expert in your field, but you move to another state and you have to start all over again. Things like that are also things that VetFran advocates on behalf of veterans and franchising and overall, because there's a lot of alignment to people that get transferred and have to start all over again. And that's one of the advantages of franchising. If there's an opportunity to transfer your business or to sell that and move to another area and open up the business and expand or get a multi-unit, that's one of the beauties of franchising. So helping veterans understand some of that is another thing that's out there. Come to a VetFran meeting. Participate at the IFA convention. That's where they hold meetings there. They go to the Hill every September in our advocacy journey up and talk to our Congress about that, which can be a challenge in and of itself, but it's again something that we do and we got to keep doing it and just be open to having conversations with what's important to the veteran, but always keep your brand, and your brand culture at the paramount, because again, I say this about the Marine Corps, I think I was a Marine since I was 5 and my oldest brother was a Marine and came back from Vietnam and I was enamored with it. He was in his dress blues, looked sharp. So I knew I was going to be a Marine. I think when you talk to veterans, they have a hardcore ingrained set of values and beliefs. If they align with your brand's values and beliefs, now you've got a match. If they don't, then don't try to push that rope up a hill, because I think that's the other thing, especially people that have been career military. There's some things that are really core to them that they're not willing to sacrifice, and they shouldn't have to. If the brand doesn't align with that, that's okay. A veteran doesn't fit in every brand. Let them find the brand that identifies to them and hits on what it is they want to do.
Good stuff, man. That is awesome. That makes total sense. And I think whatever the person's background is, whether it's military or not military, making sure that it's a right fit culturally is the most important thing for both parties, franchisor and franchisee alike.
Veteran or non-veteran. Yeah, exactly.
Yeah. What about trends you're seeing in franchising, Joe? What's the latest trends that you think are out there coming into now 2024?
Well, I think anything that you look at to survive some sort of an upheaval, right? The COVID is always fresh in our minds, and you start looking at, all right, how would we pivot if there's, God forbid, a terrorist attack and you have your business, or what insurance do you have to cover for things that you didn't anticipate? I think those are trends that we look at in our businesses, having been there, weather related, cybersecurity related, food, E. coli, whatever. We all have challenges depending on what the business entails. And I think understanding that and how the franchisor adapts to that, or what they're looking at as a business model, how over the next 3 to 5 years they're integrating technology to help us evolve through some of those things that we may not be able to control necessarily through manpower. I'm big on force multipliers, Frank. I think when we look at things in our business, what can help us go faster with less capital investment than we did 10 years ago. And, having been in it a long time, you and I both can think back. And I remember, when applications were coming in via fax for franchising, and we were doing radio shows in Detroit, and it's Christmas Eve, and I'm sitting in my office answering the phone for people calling. Right nowadays, both on the franchisor side, but on the franchisee and on the franchise evolution and looking at what you're going to buy as a franchise, I know that's paramount. That's paramount to existing owners to think what this is going to look like. And, I know everybody's talking about artificial intelligence. I don't want to beat that. They probably talked about it in every interview here, but how the client's going to adapt going forward, what businesses are coming out, there's always a desire, certainly with this economy right now, there's always a desire for absentee or hands-off businesses. I fell victim to this, and it was one of the mistakes I made early on, was to oversell that opportunity with our brand because it sounded good and it was something everybody wanted. They wanted to keep their job, they wanted to start something on the side, get it ramped up, and then maybe make that leap. We've got to be honest with the operators on what you can do successfully and what you're probably going to run into the ground if you're not there enough. And, that's just something else, I think, from a trend standpoint that I see with low unemployment and maybe what happen going forward, people looking to have a little something on the side in case they get let go. Well, make sure it's not just a waste of your time and money, and make sure as a franchisor, you're not selling it just to sell a unit, but that you're committed to opening it and being, successful.
Yeah. And we're also, we're seeing more sophisticated franchise buyer now than ever before, a bigger trend towards multi-unit franchise operators. There's more brands now that are only selling multi-unit franchises and multi-brands, which has also changed the face. The ever-present now private equity involved in franchising, and that has changed the game a whole lot. And, remains to be seen how that will play out. What are your thoughts on private equity involvement in franchising now more than ever?
My brother's in private equity, and I've seen it for years. I've seen successful ones as you have as well. To me, it's a pendulum. So much of this is a pendulum. Private equity having so much momentum, and so many franchisors were at that point where they were looking to exit or wanted that boost of cash from private equity. But I think we've learned some lessons of what happens, when it's not done for the right reasons, or it's done at a multiple, it's not sustainable, and they cut corners to where you never should cut corners, and it affects people's lives, right? Sure. So I think, like medicine, right, used appropriately and taken in the right doses, it can be really effective at what you're trying to do. But for me, and again, I think my focus, I guess, in that last response was more about the emerging franchisors, because, they get caught into a tidal wave that their entire vision and what they want to do with the business is gone. They get cycled out, or they realize, and I really can't work with these people because it's not my decision to make as much anymore. But there's also private equities that are really just the money behind it, and they let the visionary and the person run the business. So I think it comes down to, again, doing their due diligence, talking about, are they a proven model? What are they doing with other brands? That's probably a good indicator what they would do with yours and what's going to happen there.
Sure. It's got to be a right match. And for some people, bootstrapping is the way to go. Others, if you're going to take that outside money, know who you're getting married to.
Right. It's like anything else, right? You can't stereotype it into being all good or all bad. It's going to be on a case-by-case basis. But look, I'm also glad it happened in franchise in one respect, Frank, because I think it did bring in more sophisticated operations. It brought in more financial discipline to things. And I think, again, the beauty about franchising and the opportunity we have through IFA to network and talk to that is that accelerated learning curve. That was another force multiplier of understanding what works, what doesn't work, how you're going to do rapid change and Moore's law to identify how we're going to get twice as good in half the time.
Yeah. And I think we're in this new golden age of franchising I've been talking about a lot lately on the podcast. Of course, franchisors have been seeing incredible success of expansion. Hopefully those franchisors, nobody's expanding. Well, we know people are expanding too quickly, but only expand as much as you can support. Joe, in the last 30 years you've been in franchising. Can you believe it's 30?
Yeah, this is the 31st year. It's crazy, man.
What's been your biggest surprise in franchising in the 31 years?
Oh, man. I think the staying power of brands, and I wouldn't say surprising necessarily, but I think it's exhilarating to see the determination and the ability that brands have to pivot and learn from mistakes and not let them drag them down. And again, I think credibility and trust is just so important. It's at the center of every relationship with franchisor, franchisees, and you got to have trust in your suppliers and your vendors that are coming into it. But yeah, I think that's probably my biggest just pleasant surprise is how it's evolved and figured out problems that, were tests we couldn't study for. I mean, COVID was a test we couldn't study for, and yet the work that franchising did with PPP and idle and just learning. We would do weekly calls, Frank, with buddies of mine and franchising, and Susan Beth, I know, Nancy Bigley, Sonda Kitchen, Paul Pickett, all people and we've interacted with, John Teza. We would get on calls and we'd be like, all right, best practice. What did we learn this week? Yeah, we might do it with a cocktail on a Thursday evening or something. But, those are the things that I think are just so fantastic, and opportunities if you seek them out, if you really speak up and raise your hand and say, hey, I need help.
Yeah. Yep. Speak up, get involved, go to conferences. You'd be amazed on who you meet and what you're going to learn, right? Joe, I finish here with the tip jar because the franchise community is so generous. If I'm an entrepreneur looking to franchise my concept, what's a piece of advice that you'd give me before I go ahead with it?
I would think before you franchise it, the question to ask is, what's it look like in 10 years? If your agreement's a 10-year franchise agreement, which is pretty common, right? Mm-hmm. The renewals are going to be coming at you. Are you really set up for people to want to do this business again? And I talk about this, whether it's marriage relationships, and if you had a 10-year renewal on your marriage license, somebody would do a default, or we would save a lot of divorces probably. But I think, to me, it's, are you building it today so that people want to do it again in 10 years? There's a lot to that. And obviously there's a million great tips that could come out of that. But I want people to be able to do it again. I want people to look at it and go, you know what? I believed in this so much, I'm in again. And not have it be contentious, not have it be something that they've got to feel like they're winning and you're losing, or you're losing and they're winning. I want to be able to look at people down the line and feel good about what you've done. And that would be my recommendation to somebody looking to get it started. Obviously, that entails making sure that people are making money, making sure that the franchisee is getting a good return on investment, that the legal side of it isn't always the first course of conflict resolution. That should be the last course, right? Can they call you? Are you approachable enough that they'll call you and talk to you about things that you need to know that maybe you don't want to hear? And be that person that lets them feel comfortable to do that, because, man, that's going to serve you well and avoid a lot of problems later.
Joe, great advice. Great advice. Thank you so much for being on the show. I appreciate it. It was great seeing you. It's been too long, and I hope to catch up with you soon.
Absolutely, buddy. Thanks for all you do as well, and keep it going.
Thanks, Joe. Thank you for tuning into the Emerging Franchise Brands podcast. For additional insights, guest applications, and to stay connected, visit us at efbpodcast.com. The Emerging Franchise Brands podcast is for entertainment purposes only, and the views expressed do not necessarily represent those of Emerging Franchise Brands, its host Frank Fiume, or Emerging Franchise Group, LLC. Any discussed franchise or investment opportunity requires thorough investigation, obtaining proper disclosure documents, and expert consultation before making any investment decisions. The podcast and its host do not offer professional advice or endorsements, and they hold no responsibility for actions, representations, accuracy, or consequential damages related to the podcast content.